Someone said to me recently, which did actually strike an emotional nerve, what makes you qualified to speak on this topic? And I'd only met them for 30 seconds and it was like someone had just stabbed a knife in my chest and turned it. And I was like, my lived experiences.
I am so big on this. The phrase, be humble, I am sick to death of it. And so many of you know my opinion on this. I have made a few little videos here and there on social media about how much I hate the concept and the popularity around having to be humble yourself, humility. I think it's such a waste. I think it keeps people from their self-worth. I think when you could be spending so much of that time raising your confidence, to be struck down with, well, you're not humble enough because you talk about your achievements, is so unfortunate. And every single time I've shared my opinion on this, I get so much hate because people are like, well, it's just, it's being modest and it's being kind, but those are actually just two completely different words. And if you looked up being humble in the dictionary, the definition is to have a low sense of one's own importance. When I was a lot younger, I used to see this phrase everywhere. And I remember Googling the definition and thinking, why is everybody putting so much pressure on this? And throughout my experience on social media, I see it almost every single day, whether it's in a meme or a video or just life advice that people are trying to give. And when I was a teenager, I found myself continuously going back to Google because I just genuinely didn't understand it until I really just locked in on, I don't like this. And I'm not going to let this expectation rule my life and how I decide to view myself and act. Although a lot of people disapproved, you can imagine my excitement and my surprise when one day I was scrolling on Instagram and one of my very good friends posted a picture of the book she was reading, and it was called Being Humble. Immediately, I was like, who is this author? What is this book? I need to purchase immediately. And I did just that. I did my Amazon next day delivery. I read this book in a day and it was absolutely amazing. And I'm very excited to share that the author of this book, Stefanie Sword-Williams, is the guest for today's podcast. If you don't know who Stefanie is, then you need to get to know, because not only is she the author of this wonderful book, she is also a public speaker and an entrepreneur. She founded the platform Being Humble to empower people to recognize their self-worth, to make progress in their careers, and so much more. And I'm going to be sitting down with her today to get all of the juice and all of the advice. And we're going to be providing you with all of the value on why self-promotion isn't a dirty word, how to get ahead, the mindset shifts you need, all of the practical steps, and so much more. So I would like to give a very, very warm welcome to Stefanie.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Welcome to Self-Obsessed. Thank you for writing this amazing book. Stefanie is also rocking her merch right now, which we've got on the table, which I am obsessed with. You've done that so well. I'm so excited to talk to you today. And in true Self-Obsessed fashion, we always just get straight into it. My first question to you is, what's the point in self-promotion? Although I love your work, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. And I definitely used to have this limiting belief when I was younger, which is my work will just speak for me. If I'm doing good enough, it's fine, and my time will come and people will see me. I don't have to talk about it. I don't have to shout about it. So why is self-promotion so important?
I think it's because we have been taught a lie, essentially. Like, we are told if you work hard, you'll go far. But how many of us have worked really hard and not gone far? And I think what we don't necessarily talk enough about is the communication aspect that is done in our careers in order to get the results that people get. Like, if you look at the Kardashians, their success is hands down due to Kris Jenner, right? Kris Jenner, the momager, running around, piping it, like talking about all of them individually, bigging them up, hyping them up, right? Not all of us have a Kris Jenner in our life. The flip side, you might look at like artists, celebrities, they have agents, they have people that are speaking about them when they're not in rooms. Yet we're led to believe if we're not plucked out just because we're great at what we do, then we must be a failure. And that's sort of what I want to challenge, is this notion of, no, it's absolutely fine that you do a great job at work, that you put in all your effort, you do what you're supposed to. You go above and beyond, you do more than what you're supposed to do. But if you're not communicating that and people don't know that, you're not going to reap the benefits. And that's really what I wanted to say with being humble. But I also must caveat at the start of this session, like, I do believe in being humble at certain points of your career, right? So after today's session, if you're like, you're an amazing guest today, and I'm not going to be like, I know I'm amazing, I'm just an amazing speaker as a guest. At that point, I'd be humble and I'd be gracious and I'd say, thank you so much, really love speaking to you. So what I'm trying to encourage people to think about is, when should we dial up how humble we are, and when do we need to dial it down and actually believe in ourselves and back ourselves?
Yeah, I think it's about when people are giving you your flowers for your achievements and you're trying to play them down, is where the problem of being humble comes from. Like, oh no, it wasn't that much, or no, everybody does that. And it's like, not only is it a problem that you're saying this to people who could very well continue to spread your work and your name in such big rooms, but also it's the way that you're choosing to speak to yourself, which is influencing your self-perception. But I think what you said there is really important, because everybody can work hard and everybody can be capable of achieving such great things. And if everybody in the world did just that, what is in place to help people actually recognize who we are and what our work is if we're not talking about it and if we're not allowing ourselves to be seen? So I also wanted to ask, what has been your personal journey with this? I know every successful person I've spoken to, I'm always very intrigued by what their journey has been, because I found this pattern where it's always something that we struggle with when we're younger, and then we just pour all of our passion and time and energy into trying to overcome that problem or trying to learn this area of knowledge until we master it and eventually get ourselves into a place where we can teach other people how to achieve that thing that we spent so much of our lives trying to overcome ourselves. Would you say you can relate to that?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I didn't ever really feel academic enough growing up. I think that was probably my thing of, I would do things and people would be like, oh, she'll go far, but we're not sure we're doing what, right? And I felt like maybe I was more on the creative side, didn't necessarily have a clear route in what I wanted to be as a career until I went to like university and started specialising in the things I was interested in. And I think that lack of validation, maybe that feeling of maybe not feeling enough, made me want to work in a space where I helped other people feel more. I've also helped a lot of people in my life with mental health issues, and with that means you often are someone who is optimistic, you make lots of jokes, or you try and entertain people to uplift moods. You are very hyper aware of people's emotions and environments that you're in, and you spend a lot of time wanting to make people feel valued enough to know how valued they really are. And I think those combinations of both my own experience, but also the way that I was exposed to supporting people quite early on in my life, I think that led to me wanting to do something more meaningful with my work. I spent the first half of my career working in advertising, and I loved it, from learning about storytelling and, you know, really getting to work on like TV adverts and getting to get stuck in and think of creative ideas and all those great things. But I ended up often working on accounts that I maybe didn't feel passionate about the product or the service or the brand. And I just knew in the core of me that there was something more meaningful that I was put on this earth to do. Like, I feel like my skills are much better placed in helping people and supporting them on their way. So I think a combination of never wanting people to feel how maybe I felt at certain points in my life, which was not enough, and helping people to see that instead of waiting for the external validation, you can self-congratulate.
Yeah.
You can validate yourself. You can stop being humble, and you can stop denying praise, and you can stop trying to blend in just to make other people feel more comfortable. Actually, this is more about putting you on a pedestal, especially if you maybe haven't felt like that in the past.
On that journey from feeling not quite good enough to becoming a self-validating queen, I'm so curious, was there any content on that journey that inspired you or uplifted you? I think that this is a really great way to give the audience a practical way to be like, maybe this is what I should be consuming. Media is everywhere. You know, we've got books now, we've got podcasts, YouTube videos, motivational talks. Did any of that play a role in kind of up-leveling your confidence?
Yeah, there are a few pieces of content that definitely inspired me on my way. So Jai Zhang did the TED Talk, What I Learned from 100 Days of Rejection. Ooh. So he went around thinking of different ways to get rejected and then carried out this experiment to see if he could get rejected and to learn to sit in that discomfort, but to keep putting himself back out there. And it's a really amazing TED Talk. If you've not seen it, I love it. Mike Kinney did a talk on how a pro wrestler's guide to confidence. So he was a semi-pro wrestler, and when he stepped into the ring, he learned how to dial up his confidence, to be this entertainer, to be this performer. And I remember thinking, yeah, there's a lot of times in our careers where we actually have to just dial it up. We don't always have to be like that all the time, but we do have to dial it up. And then I'd say Brené Brown. I mean, it's quite an obvious one. She's an icon in professional development space. But one of the quotes that she said is, if you're not also in the arena getting your butt kicked, I don't want to hear from you. And I think that's a really powerful quote that I've always held, especially whilst building a provocative brand, that there are a lot of people that are going to come to you and try and force their opinions on you or tell you you've made a bad decision. I remember somebody literally messaged me saying, I think I understand what you're doing, but you've picked the worst ever name like I've ever seen. I hope nobody falls for your lies. And I remember just laughing, thinking like, what gives people the audacity to just slide into my DMs and say that, especially when you've not actually consumed my content or learned from it. But that quote in particular from Brené Brown has absolutely powered me through so many moments, that has reminded me that, like, if you're not actually willing to be vulnerable, you know, put things out there, feel exposed in the same way I have all of these years, then I don't necessarily need to take on your feedback. And even if you are, I still don't need to take on your feedback. But it's just that reminder of we should learn from the people that we are inspired by and that we admire, not the people that would never in a million years do what you have the courage to do.
Exactly. What you said about somebody hating the title is so funny and should serve as such a reminder that hate can be so irrelevant, because that one person hating on your title is exactly what inspired me to want to read your book, because I love the title so much. I love that you wouldn't normally see it. I think it's such an amazing idea. And like you said, I'm sure there's been a lot of controversy. Like you said, you named it a controversial kind of title around naming your book, Being Humble. I feel like that really links into building some comfort and confidence around the fact that you're going to be disliked and that you're going to get negative opinions from people. What has been your experience in this process of embracing being disliked, and how that's empowered you on your self-promotion journey rather than kind of force you to be quiet and get back in your shell and think, you know, I should just be humble and quiet and modest and never talk about myself?
So I started Being Humble in 2018, and my goal really was to create events that people came to and like, oh, this doesn't feel like networking. This is like amazing. Like, I actually want to learn about my career. And I had two names on the table at the time. I've always loved R&B, especially bands like Destiny's Child and artists like Eve and Gwen Stefani. And there was one name which was Say My Name, because I liked the idea of like, say my name in front instead of other people's. But then I spoke to a friend and she was like, you wouldn't get away with that because of law infringement and things like that, because it's already a song lyric. And there was Being Humble on the table. And I remember texting my best friends at the time and they were like, we like it, but it could alienate a lot of people. It could put them off. And actually I replied quite quickly at that point and said, well, then they're not the people I'm targeting. And even the shyer people or more introverted people who maybe wouldn't verbalize this externally, they feel that sense of permission to speak up and share. So I remember literally from the outset being semi-warned by my nearest and dearest. And then what was quite interesting about starting Being Humble is I got a lot of early press. So I was featured in the Times. There was a double page spread written about me, and it was be relentless and boast like a millennial. And so even that, like the way the article was written, there was about 80% of the article was, is this right? Should we trust this person? You know, it was, I learned very quickly in that article that when there's any press written about you, unless it really is like a stunning, glowing review, there's got to be a story to grip the viewers, right? So it was 80% questioning this, and then the final paragraph was like, but I actually really like what Steph's doing, and I think this is going to be a big moment. I ended up going on BBC World News, and then about 3 months in, I got absolutely slammed in the Financial Times. So this was pre-book. This was, I'd done maybe 2 events at this point, and I'd got a call to say I was going to be featured in the Financial Times. And I remember texting my dad being like, this is cool, like Financial Times is major. And the person called me and said, she literally said the words, I understand what you're trying to say, but we're going to go against you on this. And I said, okay, am I allowed to comment on it? No. Am I allowed to know what the title is? No. She just called to get my name and full name, my age, and what university I went to. And the article was titled, Why Shameless Self-Promoters Aren't Welcome in My Inbox. And she went on to write 3 paragraphs about me. She said I was disturbing. She said I picked up this drivel at university. She said nobody wants to work for tedious blowhards. And if they did, it would be alarming. Like, she went in. And I was obviously like devastated. And I remember was on the phone to my dad, like crying my eyes out. And he was like, oh, just ignore her. Like, what does she know? But, I think one of the hard things was it was a public shaming by a woman.
Yes.
Really. And what she'd really missed was the feminist angle on this point, to be honest. Anyway, a few hours later, my sister called me and said, how are you doing? Dad said you were quite upset. And I was like, fine, she's just not my demographic. And she burst out laughing. And she was like, I love how quickly you've changed the script or the narrative on this. And I think it was, again, in this early process of being criticised and questioned that it made me dig my heels in more and go, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. I think I've always had that, back to your earlier question, I've had that bit of a chip on the shoulder of I'm going to prove people wrong. Anyone that's doubted me, I promise I will prove you wrong. And she was one of those people, because she'd not read my book, she'd not attended my events, she hadn't spoke to my customers. She literally had seen my website and the title and she just went in. And so I think with that, it's a level of resilience. It's thick skin. It was like thrown in the fire right at the beginning of the process and the journey. Honestly, since then, nothing's really been that bad, because I think what's been most important is, even if I get like hate comments or really horrible things, I'm just like deleted and blocked. Like, I don't need you in my energy. Yeah. Like, some people say it's really good feedback and I'm like, no, I'm like positive side of social media. I put out everyone to enhance and help other people's lives. If you don't like it or you want to comment negative things, then I'm not allowing you in my orbit. I'm open to be challenged or questioned or even have a debate on the topic. But what I'm not going to have is have you be horrible to me online, because that's just not what I'm about. And it's not what I want to stand for either. So again, I think for me personally, I've definitely been on a journey with it, but I think the most damage was done at the beginning. And if anything, it just propelled me to work that bit harder. And I found my tribe and I love all of the community that I have. And, I was in a taxi recently and there was a driver who asked what I did and I told him, and he didn't respond that well. He was quite upset actually by the statement and proceeded to tell me, well, I've been raised to be humble. And, sometimes I might kind of choose to defend myself. But in that moment, I was like, I don't need to. The right people get it. The right people feel emotionally connected to it straight away. For everyone else, I don't really have the energy to convince you of it, unless I really believe that it's going to have a profound impact on that person's life. I don't need to be liked and loved by everyone. And that is also a hard internal need to challenge and let go of. But I think when you go into it with such a provocative brand, you have to expect that you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and that's fine. I don't like tea or coffee anyway, so I'm good with that.
I love that. That's such an incredible story to learn from. And I love what you said about, if they don't agree, they're just simply not my people. You carry on, you do what you got to do. And I know that you've said previously that self-promotion is about aligning with those that fall in line with your values rather than trying to prove to people what your worth is. And that really makes me wonder about the common self-promotion myths that are out there. In your line of work, have you ever seen people kind of hold certain beliefs about self-promotion which may be holding them back, but in fact are not the truth? Because one thing that I've kind of picked up just from having this conversation with you, just from reading the book, is I think a lot of people have this old belief that self-promotion equates to shouting from the rooftops about yourself, about how amazing you are, trying to, be like, look at me, love me, appreciate me, give me a raise, reward me. But the statements that you've said in the past actually really prove that wrong. So would you kind of add anything to that? Is there anything that's kind of holding people back but is in actuality false?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. The actual understanding of what the word means. So self means I, and promotion is an activity that supports an aim or a goal. There's no reason to feel arrogant or awkward for doing it.
Yeah.
There's, unfortunately for us, we've seen arrogant people do it in an arrogant way. So what we're really lacking is role models. So I would always encourage people to seek out others that they think are doing a good job of storytelling or talking about their career. How do they show up in meetings? How do they present themselves online? What do they post on LinkedIn? What things do you see that you do like and you do engage with that you don't find irritating or self-indulgent? So first and foremost, my advice is to encourage those people to go seek out forms of self-promotion that they do actually like or admire. I think the second thing is there's a belief of, I've got where I am without self-promoting. I don't need to do that. And honestly and truly, it's a bit of a privilege, right? Because if you think of like market stall owners, when they've got to sell their fruit every day, they're shouting, they're like 3 for a fiver, 3 for £10. They have to self-promote to sell their products. If you've got this far in life and not self-promoted, amazing, right? But what we saw with the pandemic was all of a sudden job security was out, people are losing their jobs, and for the last 4 years we have seen mass layoffs and redundancies. And the number one feedback I get from the people who I've spoken to that have lost their jobs is, I wish I hadn't left self-promotion so late. I wish I'd have been posting on LinkedIn all this time. I wish I'd been building a network outside of my company or my career. I wish I had helped other people along the way more, so that now I'm asking for help, it feels less transactional. I wish I had things like my portfolio and a website ready, because now I'm doing it at a time when I don't feel as confident in myself. So actually, I think the biggest mistake is that people don't think they need it because they're good where they are. And actually what that's not doing is planning for the future. So I think self-promotion is not only about helping you to achieve what you want to achieve right now in the moment, but it's also future-proofing you for the fact that you are not in control of what happens with markets or with clients or with budgets. And being able to quickly pivot, being able to quickly promote yourself to an investor or a new client or a new potential boss that you've met needs to be done promptly. But if you've not got the time or the capacity, or you've actually not even observed the best ways to self-promote, you're going to find that really difficult. So my advice to anyone listening is more, don't think you've got it all in the bag right now, right? Put your eggs in all different baskets. Make sure that you're getting that. I had a website from the beginning of working my career whilst I worked full time. I didn't need a website. I was a project manager. I wasn't like an artist, but I had one just in case I needed it. I had business cards. I had logos. I was posting on social media about my work. I was building that brand whilst I was working full time, because you never know how situations can change. So if nothing else, I recommend just to really be thinking about, how can I have some form of self-promotion ready, or a bit of a strategy, so that if any part of my situation changes, I'm not completely stuck.
Just there, you touched on kind of the best ways to self-promote, and you use social media as an example. I think social media is such a powerful tool, especially for people who might be a little bit more introverted. Networking things just might not be, their thing, handing out business cards and things like that. So it's such an amazing tool. Do you have any specific examples, whether it's something you've done or that you've seen other people do, that you think, that's actually a really great, nice, easy, even way to self-promote online?
So I would always recommend that people choose the channels that show them in the best possible way. So I speak to a lot of people and they're like, do I need to start a TikTok channel because everyone's on TikTok? I'm like, not unless the work that you're doing would be beneficial, or it would be benefited by you showing up on video, right? So if you want to be a podcaster, if you want to be a host, if you want to be a thought leader, if you want to be a presenter, yes, it might be beneficial for you to show up on video. But if you're trying to be a therapist, for example, you might not necessarily need to do that. You might be more used to, or you might enjoy more writing a Substack, or you might feel more confident writing LinkedIn posts, or you might actually feel better doing self-promotion in person instead of online, because actually that's part of your way that you engage with people. So I always recommend that people think about, how do your skills apply best to what channel, essentially? Which channel is going to show you in the best possible way? Then I would always recommend it. I can't say I always do it, but pre-batch content. The more you pre-create, the better. LinkedIn's already installed features where you can pre-schedule content in the app now, so you don't even have to pay for anything. Same with Instagram and all the other channels, you can pretty much pre-schedule now. The more you do it, the less likely you are to back out from posting.
Yes.
Because it only takes one bad email, one rejection, somebody making a comment about your self-promotion, and you go, oh, I don't think I should do that today. There is nothing more fulfilling than then pre-scheduling it, posting it, and then getting notifications a week later and being like, I completely forgot I did that. And what's great is you're able to then focus on the thing that you want to do, which is your job. So I would allocate time once a week or once a month or however you want to batch create content, but definitely try and do as much as you can up front, because it stops you from backing out and it just lets you focus on the things that you need to focus on. And then I think finally, one of the things that I'm seeing a lot with self-promotion is people aren't changing the script. People aren't doing different things, right? And so we'll keep seeing posts on top 5 ways to use your voice at work or top 5 ways to have money management this year, right? But it just feels really generic and boring. And then today I was scrolling through and I saw somebody had made a typeface out of sriracha sauce, right? So they'd got the sriracha bottle and had made a new alphabet typeface and they turned it into this video. And I'm like, yeah, that's what really grabs my attention.
Amazing.
That's what I'm speaking on a podcast about. Someone who's made a typeface out of sriracha sauce. And I think we don't think enough about how we can disrupt people's feeds. So I've been building my business out in New York over the last year. And I really wanted to find a way that I could grab people's attention whilst also promoting the work that Being Humble does. So I went to Washington Square Park, I took 2 seats and I sat in the park offering free career advice. I had this sign in that said free career advice. For the first 20 minutes, no one turned up and it was awful. I felt so exposed, I felt so vulnerable. And then eventually one person sat down, then another, and it ended up possibly being one of my favourite career days ever. And I filmed that content and, you know, it maybe didn't make the biggest storm in the US. I probably only got to speak to like 10 to 15 people. But when I captured that content and put it on Instagram and TikTok, on Instagram, it was my first piece of viral content. Everybody absolutely loved it. And it was because it disrupted people's feeds. So I think what we need to think about with our self-promotion is to get creative. I personally am looking more about quality over quantity. I'm pulling back and going, if I'm only going to post 2 to 3 times instead of 5 times a week or showing up every single day, what can I do to make these ideas or invest in this content sharing that could make it just a little bit more impactful, that could make it a bit more shareable? Because the little bit of extra time you do up front thinking about that could have a much longer impact on how well that content lives online, essentially. So yeah, I think my top 3 tips are: find the channels that show you in the best possible way, pre-create and pre-batch content so you don't back out, and start getting more creative with what you're putting out there. Think about experiments, stunts, different ways that you could grab people's attention, because we're seeing a lot of the same stuff right now.
That's so practical. So thank you for sharing. I can definitely advocate for batching content. I still do that to this day. I have all of my Instagram. It just goes out. I don't even know when it's being posted. Like you said as well, LinkedIn just launched video. So if you're really good at self-promotion on TikTok, you can easily just reshare those on LinkedIn and reach new audiences, which for me is great. LinkedIn terrifies me. It's not my platform, probably never will be. So I like to just schedule and then run away. So moving on to offline now. In real life, self-promotion, what would that look like? Do you have any examples?
So I actually gave a really good example of a more positive taxi driver experience the other day. So I was coming back for an event and this taxi driver said, oh, what have you been doing? And I was like, I was speaking at an event. And he said, oh, what was the event about? And I said, well, I run a business called Being Humble. And I was giving a talk on self-belief and confidence. And he literally replied and was like, being what? And I was like, being humble. I help people claim what they deserve and take up more space. I wrote a book on the topic. And he was like, is it on Amazon? And I was like, yeah, it's next day delivery. You can get it tomorrow. And he's like, I'm ordering it. I need it right now. It was a really nice reminder of how natural and organic self-promotion can be in a conversation, right? Like I could have easily been like, yeah, I was just at an event, like, or just like, oh, get on my phone, like do anything to avoid that conversation. But in 3 very simple steps, what I did was I said something memorable. So I can guarantee that taxi driver won't have heard the 3 words, being humble that day. I then tapped into an emotional connection. So I straight away said, I help people get what they deserve in their careers and I help them to take up space. And then what I did was I slipped in that I've written a book. So I talked about the product, but very casually, very candidly, very like, I'm not trying to sell you anything. It was like, I think I said 3 things in the space of 6 minutes. And just by having that quite considered messaging of what it is that I'm trying to get across, it felt one like a very organic conversation, but I was able to communicate that value quite quickly. And so I think so much of it is about that prepared narrative that we have ready. So when we talk about self-promotion, what I encourage a lot is self-reflection. Because if we don't reflect on our achievements and our successes, when those moments come round, we're not ready to say that. I know I can use that now in every conversation because I've nailed that. Likewise, if someone asked me what my, favorite ever project was, I'd be able to talk about it because I spend time reflecting on that. So I think so much of it is thinking about when you're going into physical situations. If you're going to a networking event and it's all about rejection, I would think about yourself. When was a time you were rejected? What's a book or a piece of content you've read, listened to, or consumed about rejection? What's going on in the media about rejection? Get that narrative ready, because so much of what we struggle with in real life is the conversation. It's carrying the conversation. It's leading it in a different way. I also think having something physical is important. So I came today and I was like, right, we've just launched merch. I wanted to bring you a cap, some stickers. I often have postcards with me. And look, it doesn't cost a lot. Like, I've used moo.com, shout out to Moo, for years, and you can get about 50 postcards for like £50 or whatever it is. It's not expensive in the grand scheme of things. And then when I meet people, instead of like a little business card that sometimes gets lost or thrown away, I'm like, oh, I've got this postcard, it's got a QR code you can scan through to the website, or at least on your phone have a QR code to any channel that you want to send people to. So set it as your screensaver, and you can drive people to TikTok channels, LinkedIn, your online shop, whatever it is. And think about those intentional physical interactions we can have. I had a party for Being Humble's 6th anniversary last week, and there's an amazing florist, Melissa Flowers, and we've been talking about wanting to work together for ages, but we've just not had the right event opportunity. And she came with a bouquet of beautiful flowers, and I was like, that's really kind of you. No, not many other people came with a gift, not that I expected them to, but I came away and I was instantly like, I must find a way to work with this person. Like, I felt emotionally connected to, just because there was that physical thing. And especially for me personally, where I give a lot to others, and honestly, I don't always receive it. And that's okay, because that's not why I do the work. But I do think if you are trying to connect with people that you admire, that you appreciate, a small gesture or a small token of gratitude in any form that you can do really does stick in people's mind. I spoke to a woman in PR, and she said to me, the thing about being in PR is everybody always wants something. But sometimes it would just be nice if, in exchange for me covering their story, they say, do you want me to give you a social media audit just to say thank you, or let me take you out for a cocktail, whatever it is, just some recognition that what you're doing is asking for something in return of someone else. So you are recognizing their time, essentially. So I think, having your script, having answers, having conversation starters ready is super important for physical networking. I think having something in person that you might be able to give to people is really helpful. And I also think what's really important is about experimenting with different formats of in-person networking or self-promotion, because I think for a lot of people, they do something once, they go to a networking event, they hate it, and that's them done. Right? And part of the inspiration by my free career advice was I saw a guy who stood in Canary Wharf trying to get a job. He was a graduate, he was struggling. I saw this post come up online where he stood with a sign with his CV on it and a QR code, and it said, struggling to get a job in the banking industry, I think it was. Please scan my CV and see what you think. Somebody saw him, posted him on LinkedIn, and it went viral.
Wow.
And it was such a simple, like a board that he literally could have got for like £2 from an art shop, stuck on a QR code and his name and details. And that went on to him getting hundreds of offers, like so many different engagements, interactions, conversations. And I think it comes back to my earlier point about social media, is like, how do we make sure that we're trying to do something more memorable or create an experience that people don't always create? I've been invited to something in a couple of weeks' time, which is a walk and talk day, where we go on a walk. It's sponsored by a shoe brand, but we meet up and we walk through a forest to enjoy nature together. And it's a bunch of creative people. And I'm like, yeah, I would really like to come to that. I go to lots of panel events. I go to lots of in conversations with, but this feels like a different exchange. It feels like something worth me being there physically. So I think thinking about ways that we can surprise people's day, or we can make that memorable experience, is really important. But if nothing else, I think always just show an interest in the person. ask lots of questions.
Love that. And what really stood out to me in that story was, in particular, the taxi experience. You said that you've had a negative one before, and especially if you're getting into a taxi, this is a stranger that's driving you don't know what response they're going to have. I love that you name dropped the book, knowing that it's a controversial title, knowing that you've had hate for it before, that his response could have gone one or two ways. You did it anyway. And I've seen so many examples of, let's take influencers, for example. There are so many negative connotations around that job title. So what a lot of influencers do is, if somebody asks, what do you do? They're like, oh, I just do social media. Or like, I make ads for brands. And they make it a lot smaller. They make it more digestible because they're trying to predict the perception that the other person is going to have of them, or the judgment that they might have. And you never know what that person might be thinking. You never know who that person knows. Imagine if you said, I'm an influencer, this is what I influence, e.g. I empower women, and I've written a book, and I have a podcast, and this is what I talk about. And it's like you said, you giving those details helps you stick in that person's mind. It might get them on Amazon to order your book. So I really love that.
I think also what's important to remember with that example, though, as well, is not leading with your title always, because people do have preconceptions and they do judge people for titles. And actually, I know when I worked in advertising, I was an account director. It sounds quite boring, like it's not a particularly like glossy thing. But behind the scenes, I'm a TEDx speaker, I'd written a book, I was a community builder, I was a marketing expert, all these great things. And if I led with account director, people might not necessarily might not necessarily see the value that you bring. So if anything, I think it's more about thinking about what's the thing you want to be remembered for and leading with that. So rather than saying I'm an influencer, it would be I help to empower women to take on their best physical lives, right? Whatever your story is. But I would push someone, when I shared this story, someone said, are we now changing the name from elevator to taxi pitch? And I was like, I think so. I think that might be my new thing. It's like, what's the taxi pitch, you know? And I guess if we come back to it, it's like, what's the memorable thing you're saying? What's the emotional connection? And what's the thing you're driving people towards? But I would be mindful of just leading with titles, because people can judge a book by its cover, and that's not fair. But I think you owe yourself the time to actually talk about yourself and the value you bring. So don't let other people's preconceived ideas of what you do stop you from self-promoting fully.
Definitely. So in true self-obsessed fashion, we are going to finish this episode with a homework chapter, which if you're new here, we always do this. This is where either myself, if it's a solo episode, or me and my guest will share practical pieces of advice on the topic that we just spoke about. So you have no excuse to not follow through on the journey and action every single thing that you want to achieve or do. So Stefanie, I would like to start by asking, what would be your advice for people who maybe they struggle with imposter syndrome, maybe they're a little bit introverted and they struggle kind of speaking out loud about their achievements?
So I think a really important thing to be thinking about is, what would you feel comfortable starting with? So don't jump in the deep end, because you won't do it and you won't keep up with it. But maybe it's just like every Friday I'm going to start documenting what I do. So I'm going to put some time in my diary and I'm going to document 2 to 3 things that I've done that week that I'm happy with. Then I would encourage you to think about, right, how could we let people know about that? So you might not want to take to social media and announce it to the world, but maybe you send an email to your boss and you say, here's 3 things I've done this week and here's 3 things I'm going to focus on next week. I actually used to do this when I worked full time, and it saved my boss chasing after me, but it was also a digital paper trail of everything that I'd been doing. So it was in writing. And then you might think about, you know, the next time you're in a meeting, you have to give a status update. Thinking about just very casually how you can start sharing those things, like, yep, here's where we're at on the project, and we've actually just had amazing feedback from the client on X, Y, and Z. They said it's the best rebrand we've ever done, and they're super, super happy with it, right? So all we're doing is just gradually like involving different aspects of talking about our successes in different formats or in different environments. We don't have to get a megaphone and stand on a chair and scream at how amazing we are, like you were saying. So I feel like it's gradually adding rather than feeling like you've got to do everything all at once straight away. And then what I would say is find people to hold you accountable. So find people who every Friday are like, let's talk about this, let's celebrate our wins. So in lockdown, me and 2 friends started a WhatsApp chat and we called it our wins before dins, where every Friday we had to voice note 2 to 3 things we'd done. And the great thing about it was accountability. Somebody would say, right, we have to get this in before 6 p.m. Share something you're happy you've done this week. And we were practicing verbalizing it, because you can write it all out, But if you're not good at verbalizing it in a performance review or in a pitch or in a podcast or whatever that speaking moment is, we don't spend enough time practicing verbalizing things. So I would find people that can hold you accountable, whether it's friends, people in your network, your line managers, mentors, but people that you can go to purely to self-promote. And that's not going to be everyone. Like I was talking about this recently. I've got great friends, but some of them would absolutely rinse me if I started being like, hey, this is what I did this week, right? So it's about finding the people who we go, look, I want to get better with building my confidence. I want to get better at talking about who would be up for doing this WhatsApp thing where we just tune in once a week and we just talk about this. And I think it's finding those people that want to see you do well and want to see you succeed, and likewise you creating those spaces as well. So if you're a manager or someone that has the opportunity to create space, like something I do at my events is at the end of the event I turn it into an open mic where anybody can stand up and self-promote and they could share a podcast or a book or their business or whatever it is. And people are always like shaking, like I couldn't possibly. And then all of a sudden you watch like 50 people stand up in a room full of strangers self-promoting, and it's the most like joyous thing to watch. And what I know is I get messages from people saying, I have never public spoken and you have just unlocked something. You allowed me to achieve that. And there is nothing more enjoyable than knowing that you helped someone do something they've never done before.
Incredible.
So I think if you have the opportunity, the space, the platform to also encourage and empower people to self-promote, do that as well, because I think it's really important. If we want to normalize self-promotion, we have to think about collective ways that we can self-promote where we're not mocked for doing it.
I love what you said about celebrating your wins as well, because I think there has to be a place for inner work on this journey as well, and building up your own confidence and fixing your own limiting beliefs to be able to get to a place where you can actually put these practical steps of self-promotion into action. One thing that I personally really like doing is journaling, where if I journal for a consistent amount of time, I've been doing it for years now, looking back on old entries of things that I wished for that I currently have, or things that I used to struggle with which wouldn't even bother me today, it helps my current self recognize all of the trials and tribulations I've been through, how exactly like experienced and accomplished I am, even if it's just through the small little daily wins. And I think as humans, it's a lot easier to hyperfixate on everything that's missing and everything that's gone wrong and everything you have to feel guilty about, that you forget that's like 1% of your entire life. And there are so many things that you are so great at and that you have achieved. And if only we focused more on that, self-promotion would feel so easy. Have you kind of had any experience in that, in doing the inner work, kind of breaking those limiting beliefs? And what would you say to our viewers that are struggling with that same problem?
So something I do, I don't know if it's toxic positivity, but something I do is when I've been rejected or something's not happened the way I thought it would or how I wanted it to, instead of wallowing, which sometimes I do a little bit, but I generally call someone straight away that I know loves me and will support me and will back me and be like, well, their loss, you're amazing sort of vibe. But secondly, one of the quickest things I do is write down something that I've done that I'm happy with that day or that week, as a bit of a response to go, I'm not going to let this negative thing be the thing that's going to represent this week or this day. So I think I'm a bit of an eternal optimist. And I think with that comes this mindset of, there must be other reasons why this is happening. And I think that's what I've always been quite good at assessing, is there's external situations going on that I'm not in control of. I watched a really good video recently the other day, and it was like, when one door closes, let it close and go open another door, because it doesn't mean that door might not reopen. And I worked with a really big brand, like dream vision board brand, and it went so well. The feedback was incredible. And I kept chasing them to be like, yeah, let's keep working together. And they're like, yeah. And we just never really got anywhere. And I was a bit gutted because I was like, oh, it's such a shame not to like galvanize off that opportunity. And then 2 years later, they got back in touch and were like, we're hosting an event. The feedback from your session was so good. It was the most engaged, most registered event we'd ever done. Of course, we were going to come back to you. And it was such a good reminder that I could have chosen in that space to pick a narrative of, well, I can't have been that good. They can't have liked me that much. If they wanted to, they would. All of these things that we say to ourselves, when instead I just kind of I actually let it go. And I guess just having that abundance mindset that something else will happen. I think I've always channeled that, and I recommend that to people who do struggle with sometimes wallowing in the low stuff, is trusting that the value you bring will result in more things, even if that thing doesn't work out. And then I think my second thing, I said it earlier, was just put your eggs in everyone's basket. This year, I lost 4 opportunities in 7 days. They didn't land. There were really exciting pitches, events. There were some really great things. And honestly, I cried for 2 days. I was so upset because it was a really meaningful thing. A few of the things were really meaningful. And I felt like it was just a real shame that the people who said they were going to invest in it pulled out. And actually being open about that and talking to people and say, oh, this happened. I had so many people reach out and be like, oh, this happened to me too. It's just a bit crap at the moment. So I think like as much as it's good to try and make yourself work through it, it's always easier when you've got other people who can get it and they feel the pain. And so I think what's been massively helpful for me is, you know, if all my friends work in offices and they work for a company, they're not going to get the struggle of a founder. So I need to build that community of people who do get it, that are doing good work, that do get rejected sometimes. So I really found it beneficial to lean on those people. And then I think with my own sort of insecurities with running a business is, the bigger we've grown, the more I've realised no one really knows what they're doing. And I know people say this all the time and it doesn't sound that profound, but you are literally making it up as you go along. Like I have not had any business training, like formal. I don't have a degree in it. Someone said to me recently, which did actually strike an emotional nerve, what makes you qualified to speak on this topic? And it was just like, and I'd only met them for 30 seconds. And it was like someone had just stabbed a knife in my chest and turned it. And I felt like this need to like come up with this big answer. And then I like just let it sit for a second. And I was like, my lived experiences.
I am so big on this. Yes.
My observations, my lived experience, and the fact that I have some set of skills to be able to advise and support on this. I'm not saying I'm the best. In fact, something that really helped with a mindset shift this year that I started really applying and sharing is I'm not trying to be the expert. I'm just contributing to the topic. And that was a real, I say it to people and I watch their shoulders go, oh, thank you for saying that. Because so often we don't step forward, we don't self-promote because we are worried we are not expert enough. We're not the most experienced in the room. There's someone cleverer, more advanced, somebody that could be talking about this topic in a more intellectual and knowledgeable way. That's absolutely fine if that's the case. But you might have a level of nuance, insight, personal behavior or personal experience that that person doesn't have. And actually, I'm writing a second book at the moment and I've been feeling a little bit like a hypocrite because I find the topic has been quite confronting and quite revealing that maybe I've not mastered what I'm teaching. And I said this to a friend and my friend was like, I said, you know, I feel like maybe I've not mastered it. Maybe I'm not the best person to be speaking about this. And she was like, but you're a relatable person. And people are going to relate to you as they did with your first book, as they do with all the content you put out, because you know how to speak to people in a way that really resonates with them and they benefit from it. And it got me thinking about, you know, those insecurities of not feeling enough, not being good enough. You know, when is enough, that question. That actually, if you were going to learn to sing, learning to sing with Beyonce would be so petrifying, or learning to run with an Olympic athlete would be so scary. And actually, me writing on this topic, maybe not being the most expert, is going to help people feel more at ease and more open to receiving what I'm sharing because I'm going through that journey with them. Yeah. And so I think that's a massive part that's helped me is speaking to people about these worries, about these concerns, about these insecurities, and using a different narrative. There is not one narrative. The only narrative is not that you're not good enough. There's a million other things happening all at once. So be kind to yourself and at least play the counter narrative that could be happening.
What a wonderful way to finish off the episode. Thank you, Stefanie, so much for sharing those super practical homework steps. It's been a pleasure having you on and just being in this conversation. I feel like I learned so much and I hope you all enjoyed it too. You can check out all of Stefanie's work, what she's got going on, her links below in the description. And thank you for being here. I'm super excited for your book, by the way.
Oh, thank you. It's not coming out for a while, but I think it will be good. I think it's just, waves of imposter syndrome a little bit, but I think you've got to power through these to see where you could go and how much better you'll come out in the end. So but thank you for having me. It's been lovely to chat.
Thank you. And I'll see you all next week on Wednesday for a brand new episode. Bye.